The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Blackwater as Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez made her way to the armory. Her boots crunched on the gravel path, each step deliberate and purposeful. At 28, she had spent the last 6 years maintaining weapons for some of the military's most elite units, but to most of the soldiers on base, she was just the woman who cleaned their rifles. Sarah pushed open the heavy steel door of the armory, breathing in the familiar scent of gun oil and metal. Rows of weapons lined the walls, each one meticulously maintained and ready for action. This was her domain, her sanctuary, and she knew every bolt, spring, and trigger mechanism better than most soldiers knew their own equipment. She moved to her workbench where 3 sniper rifles waited for her attention. The Barrett M82A1, the M24 SWS, and a newer addition to their arsenal, the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle. Each weapon represented thousands of hours of engineering, designed for one purpose: precise, long-range elimination of targets. Sarah respected that purpose, even if others didn't respect her role in maintaining it. The armory door opened with a bang, and Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison strode in, followed by 2 other members of his Special Operations team. Morrison was everything Sarah wasn't in the eyes of the military hierarchy. He was a decorated sniper with over 40 confirmed kills, a man whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. His team treated him like a legend, and he carried himself accordingly. "Martinez," Morrison said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need the Barrett ready for a mission briefing in 2 hours. We're going after a high-value target, and I can't afford any equipment failures." Sarah looked up from the M24 she was cleaning, meeting his gaze steadily. "It's already been cleaned and calibrated this morning. Bore is pristine, scope is zeroed, and all mechanical functions are operating within specifications." Morrison scoffed, shaking his head. "Look, I appreciate the technical talk, but I need to know it's actually ready, not just cleaned by someone who's never pulled a trigger in combat." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a discharged round. Sarah's teammates, Corporals Williams and Davis, exchanged glances but said nothing. They had heard variations of this conversation before, and they knew better than to interfere when Morrison was making his point about the difference between support staff and operators. "The weapon is ready, Sergeant," Sarah repeated, her voice level and professional. She turned back to her work, disassembling the M24's bolt with practiced efficiency. Morrison walked over to the Barrett, running his hands along its length like he was greeting an old friend. The rifle was a beast, weighing nearly 30 pounds and capable of punching through armor at extreme ranges. "You know what the difference is between maintaining a weapon and actually using one?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "It's the difference between reading about flying and actually piloting a fighter jet." "I understand your concern," Sarah replied, carefully cleaning each component of the bolt assembly. "But I can assure you that every weapon leaving this armory meets or exceeds operational standards." Williams, a thin man with nervous energy, cleared his throat. "Sarah's really good at her job, Sarge. Never had a malfunction with any weapon she's worked on." Morrison glanced at Williams with barely concealed irritation. "That's great, Williams, but there's a difference between good enough for training exercises and good enough for real operations. When you're trying to make a shot at 1,500 meters with lives on the line, you need to know your equipment inside and out." 1,500 meters, Sarah said quietly, still focused on her work. "Standard engagement range for the Barrett is effective to about 1,800 meters, optimal performance up to 2,000. Morrison paused, surprised by the specificity of her response. "Yeah, well, knowing the specs and actually making the shot are 2 different things." Sarah set down her cleaning rod and finally looked at him directly. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant. They are 2 different things." The silence that followed was broken by Davis, Morrison's spotter, a stocky man with arms covered in tattoos. "Come on, Jake. She knows her stuff. Let's grab the rifle and get ready for the briefing." But Morrison wasn't finished. He had built his reputation on being the best, and part of maintaining that reputation meant establishing clear hierarchies. You ever fire a sniper rifle, Martinez? I mean really fire one, not just function testing in a controlled environment. Sarah considered her answer carefully. The truth was complicated, and she had learned long ago that complicated truths often led to more questions than she was prepared to answer. I've fired various weapons for testing and familiarization purposes. That's not what I asked. Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone used to getting direct answers. Have you ever engaged a target at distance? Ever felt the pressure of making a shot that matters? No, Sarah admitted. I haven't engaged enemy targets in a combat situation. Morrison nodded, as if this confirmed everything he suspected. That's what I thought. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but when we're out there, lives depend on this equipment working perfectly. I need to know it's been handled by someone who understands what perfect actually means in the field. Sarah stood up, facing him fully for the first time in the conversation. She was several inches shorter than Morrison, but there was something in her posture that commanded attention. Sergeant Morrison, I've been maintaining sniper systems for 6 years. I know the ballistic coefficients of every round in our inventory. I can tell you the exact temperature coefficient of the barrels in those rifles and how atmospheric pressure affects bullet trajectory at various altitudes. I understand the relationship between scope magnification and target acquisition at different ranges. Morrison blinked, caught off guard by the sudden technical barrage. That's all textbook knowledge. Maybe, Sarah conceded. But textbook knowledge is what keeps your rifle functioning when your life depends on it. When you pull that trigger, everything that happens in the milliseconds that follow is governed by physics and engineering. Those are things I understand very well. Williams looked between them, sensing tension building. Sarah, didn't you grow up hunting or something? Sarah hesitated before answering. Her childhood was something she rarely discussed, partly because it was complicated and partly because it raised questions she preferred to avoid. I grew up in rural Montana. My father taught me to shoot when I was young. What kind of hunting? Davis asked, genuinely curious. Mostly deer and elk, some long-range shooting for predator control. Sarah's answers remained brief, offering information without elaborating. Morrison sensed there was more to the story. How long range? Far enough. The evasive answer only increased Morrison's curiosity. Come on, Martinez. You're talking about textbook ballistics knowledge and rural Montana hunting. What's the longest shot you've ever made? Sarah returned to her workbench, beginning to reassemble the M24. That's not really relevant to maintaining your equipment, Sergeant. But Morrison was persistent. Humor me. What's the longest confirmed shot you've made on a hunting trip? Sarah's hands never paused in their work, but Williams noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. 1,200 meters, she said quietly. The number hung in the air. Even Davis whistled low. 1,200 meters was a significant shot for anyone, let alone someone who claimed to be just a weapons maintenance specialist. Morrison's skepticism was obvious. 1,200 meters? With what rifle? Custom Remington 700 in .300 Winchester Magnum. Sarah's voice remained matter-of-fact, as if she were reading from a technical manual. What was the target? Morrison pressed. Coyote that had been harassing our cattle. My father spotted it from our house, and I took the shot from our back porch. Morrison shook his head. A 1,200-meter shot on a coyote? Do you have any idea how small a target that is at that distance? Sarah finally looked up from her work. About 4 inches if you're aiming for the vitals. Requires compensation for a 12-inch bullet drop with that cartridge, assuming standard atmospheric conditions and no significant wind. The technical precision of her answer silenced Morrison temporarily. He exchanged glances with his teammates, unsure how to process this information. The woman they had dismissed as support staff was casually discussing ballistics calculations that many trained snipers would struggle with. Even if that's true, Morrison said, regaining his composure. Hunting shots are different from tactical situations. There's no time pressure, no stress, no one shooting back at you. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. Combat situations involve variables that can't be replicated in training or hunting scenarios. Morrison felt like he was arguing with smoke. Every time he thought he had pinned down the limits of her knowledge or experience, she acknowledged his points while somehow maintaining her credibility. Look, I'm just saying that maintaining weapons and using them effectively are two different skill sets. They are, Sarah confirmed, and I'm very good at one of them. Williams, trying to lighten the mood, laughed. Come on, Sarge. Maybe we should get Sarah out to the range sometime. Let her show off a little. Morrison's expression darkened. This isn't a game, Williams. We're not here to play around with fancy shooting demonstrations. But the seed had been planted. Davis, despite his loyalty to Morrison, found himself curious about the quiet weapons specialist who apparently had more depth than anyone had realized. Actually, that might not be a bad idea. We're always looking for backup snipers in case of casualties. She's support staff, Morrison said firmly. Her job is to maintain equipment, not use it in combat situations. Sarah continued working, but her voice carried a note of quiet confidence when she spoke. Sergeant Morrison, you're concerned about whether your equipment will perform when lives are on the line. I understand that concern, but I think you're underestimating the level of precision required to maintain these systems properly. She gestured to the Barrett on the table. This rifle is capable of sub-MOA accuracy at extreme ranges, but only if every component is perfectly aligned and functioning. The scope mounting, the barrel harmonics, the trigger mechanism. Every element has to work in perfect synchronization. Understanding how to achieve that level of precision in maintenance requires the same attention to detail as achieving precision in marksmanship. Morrison found himself listening despite his skepticism. Okay, but knowing how the parts work together doesn't mean you can actually shoot accurately. Maybe not, Sarah admitted. But it means I understand what accurate shooting requires. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Richards, the base commander. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions under pressure. His presence immediately changed the dynamics in the armory. Morrison, good. I was looking for you. Richards glanced around the room, taking in the weapons and the assembled personnel. We've got a situation developing. Intelligence indicates a high-value target has been spotted in Sector 7. We need a team ready to move in 6 hours. Morrison straightened, shifting into mission mode. Yes, sir. My team can be ready in 4 hours. Good. But we've got a complication. Richards picked up one of the rifles from Sarah's workbench, examining it with the practiced eye of someone familiar with such weapons. The target is in a heavily fortified position, and preliminary reconnaissance suggests we'll need shots at extreme range, possibly beyond our normal operational parameters. How extreme? Morrison asked. Richards set the rifle down carefully. Potentially over 3,000 meters. The number caused a moment of silence. 3,000 meters was beyond the effective range of most standard sniper rifles and required exceptional skill even with the right equipment. Morrison's confidence was unshaken. The Barrett can handle that range, sir. I've made shots at 2,800 meters in training. I know your capabilities, Sergeant, Richards said, but this mission has no margin for error. We need backup plans and redundant capabilities. Sarah listened to the conversation while continuing her maintenance work. 3,000 meters was an extraordinary distance, requiring not just exceptional marksmanship, but perfect equipment performance and ideal conditions. Richards noticed her focused attention. Martinez, these weapons ready for extreme range engagement? Yes, sir, Sarah replied immediately. All systems are functioning within optimal parameters for maximum range accuracy. What's the theoretical maximum effective range for the Barrett with our current ammunition? Sarah looked up from her work. With the M33 ball ammunition, approximately 3,500 meters under ideal conditions. With armor-piercing rounds, effective range decreases to about 3,000 meters due to bullet design compromises. Richards nodded approvingly. And what factors would affect accuracy at those ranges? Environmental conditions are critical, sir. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and altitude all affect bullet trajectory. At 3,000 meters, a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind can deflect the bullet by several feet. Morrison watched this exchange with growing confusion. The weapons maintenance specialist was discussing extreme-range ballistics with the confidence and precision of a trained sniper instructor. Martinez, Richards continued, in your professional opinion, what's the probability of successful target engagement at 3,500 meters with current equipment and environmental conditions? Sarah considered the question carefully. Without knowing specific target details, environmental conditions, or shooter capabilities, I can only speak to equipment readiness. The rifles are capable of sub-MOA accuracy, which theoretically allows for target engagement at that range. But shooter skill and environmental factors would be the determining variables for mission success. Richards turned to Morrison. Sergeant, I want you to prepare for a mission that may require shooting at the absolute limits of our equipment capabilities. I also want backup plans in case primary systems fail or conditions change. Understood, sir, Morrison replied. My team will be ready. After Richards left, the armory fell silent. Morrison stared at the weapons on the workbench, processing the conversation he had just witnessed. The mission parameters were unlike anything he had faced before, and for the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether his skills were sufficient for the task ahead. Sarah resumed her work, but she was acutely aware of the change in atmosphere. The casual dismissal she had grown accustomed to had been replaced by something else. Uncertainty, perhaps even a grudging respect for her technical knowledge. Williams broke the silence. Sarah, that was pretty impressive. You sounded like you really know this stuff. It's my job to know this stuff, Sarah replied simply. Morrison picked up the Barrett, hefting its substantial weight. For the first time, he looked at the weapon not just as a tool he knew how to use, but as a complex system requiring precise understanding to function at its limits. Martinez, he said slowly, when you talk about 3,500-meter shots, are you speaking theoretically or practically? Sarah paused in her work. The question was loaded with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to address. I'm speaking about the technical capabilities of the equipment, Sergeant. That's not what I asked. Sarah met his gaze, and for a moment, the professional distance between them seemed to diminish. Some questions are better left unasked, Sergeant Morrison. The cryptic response only deepened Morrison's curiosity, but something in her tone suggested that pushing further would cross a line he wasn't prepared to cross. Not yet, anyway. As the afternoon wore on, the armory became a hub of activity. Other members of Morrison's team arrived to collect their equipment, and Sarah found herself answering increasingly detailed questions about weapon capabilities and ammunition performance. Her technical expertise was no longer being questioned, it was being relied upon. But beneath the surface of professional cooperation, Morrison continued to watch her with growing interest. The woman he had dismissed that morning was revealing depths he hadn't expected, and the mission ahead was unlike anything he had faced before. The stage was set for a test that would challenge everything Morrison thought he knew about precision shooting, and everything his team thought they knew about Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez. The mission briefing took place in the base's operations center at 1400 hours. Morrison and his team sat at a metal table facing a large screen displaying satellite imagery of the target area. Colonel Richards stood beside the screen, a laser pointer in his hand, while intelligence officers shuffled through folders of reconnaissance data. Gentlemen, Richards began. "We have confirmation that Hassan al-Rashid has been located at this compound." The laser pointer highlighted a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by rocky hills. "Al-Rashid is responsible for coordinating attacks against our supply convoys and has been our primary target in this sector for 8 months." Morrison studied the imagery carefully. The compound was isolated, positioned strategically to provide clear sight lines in all directions. Any approach would be visible from miles away. "The challenge," Richards continued, "is that al-Rashid has learned from previous attempts to capture him. He moves locations frequently and never stays in one place for more than a few hours. Our window of opportunity is extremely narrow." Captain Torres, the intelligence officer, stepped forward. "Our sources indicate he'll be at this location tomorrow morning for approximately 2 hours, meeting with local cell leaders. After that, he'll disappear for another several weeks." Morrison raised his hand. "What's the terrain like around the compound?" "Hostile in every sense," Torres replied. "Rocky, mountainous terrain with limited cover. The nearest position where we could establish a shooting position is here." The laser pointer moved to a ridgeline approximately 4 kilometers from the compound. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. 4 kilometers was well beyond his comfort zone, even with the Barrett. "That's a long shot, sir." 3,800 meters to be precise, Richards confirmed. "We're aware this exceeds normal operational parameters, but it's the only position that provides adequate concealment while maintaining line of sight to the target." Davis, Morrison's spotter, leaned forward. "Sir, at that range, environmental factors become critical. Wind conditions, temperature variations, atmospheric pressure. Small changes can mean the difference between a hit and a complete miss. Which is why we need perfect equipment performance and exceptional marksmanship," Richards said. "Morrison, you're our best sniper, but I want you to understand the stakes. This is a one-shot opportunity. If we miss, al-Rashid will know we've found him, and he'll vanish permanently." Morrison nodded grimly. "Understood, sir. My team will be ready." After the briefing, Morrison's team gathered in their quarters to plan the mission details. The weight of responsibility was evident in their subdued conversation. Williams spread topographic maps across the table, while Davis calculated atmospheric conditions using his weather monitoring equipment. "The shot angle is going to be tricky," Davis observed, running calculations on his tablet. "We're shooting downhill at a steep angle, which affects bullet trajectory." Morrison studied the maps, visualizing the shot. "What's the elevation difference between our position and the target?" "About 800 feet, Williams answered. "Downhill shots at that distance are going to drop less than expected due to gravity vector changes." Morrison rubbed his temples. The mathematics of extreme-range shooting were complex enough without adding steep angle considerations. "We'll need to do extensive calculations and probably zero the rifle specifically for this shot." "Speaking of rifles," Davis said, "maybe we should double-check everything with Martinez. She seemed to know a lot about extreme-range ballistics." Morrison hesitated. His pride suggested he could handle the technical aspects himself, but the mission was too important for ego considerations. "Yeah, you're right. Let's go talk to her." They found Sarah in the armory, working late into the evening. She was disassembling a rifle scope, examining each component under a magnifying glass. Her focus was so complete that she didn't notice their arrival until Morrison cleared his throat. "Sorry to interrupt," Morrison said, his tone noticeably different from their earlier conversation. "We need to discuss some technical aspects of tomorrow's mission." Sarah looked up, setting down her tools. "What do you need to know?" Morrison spread the mission maps on her workbench. 3,800-meter shot. Downhill angle of approximately 15 degrees. We need to understand how environmental factors will affect bullet performance at that range." Sarah studied the maps, her expression serious. "That's a significant distance. What time of day is the shot?" Approximately 0900 hours, Davis replied. Sarah nodded, pulling out a calculator and beginning to work through equations. Morning temperatures will be cooler, which increases air density and affects bullet velocity. At 3800 meters, you're looking at approximately 18 seconds of flight time. Morrison blinked. 18 seconds? Give or take, depending on exact conditions. During that time, the bullet will drop approximately 40 feet below the initial trajectory line. Wind becomes exponentially more important at those ranges. Williams leaned over the maps. How much wind compensation are we talking about? Sarah continued her calculations. A 10-mile-per-hour crosswind at that distance could deflect the bullet by 12 to 15 feet. Wind speed variations during the bullet's flight time can change the impact point significantly. Morrison felt a growing sense of unease. How do we account for all these variables? Sarah looked up from her calculations. Very carefully. You'll need real-time atmospheric data, precise range measurements, and accurate wind readings at multiple points along the bullet's path. Even then, there's a margin of error that could make the shot impossible. Impossible? Morrison's voice carried a note of alarm. Difficult, Sarah corrected. Very difficult, but not impossible if everything goes perfectly. Davis pulled out his atmospheric monitoring equipment. We've got good weather gear, and we can take readings from the shooting position. Sarah examined his equipment approvingly. This will help, but wind conditions can vary significantly between your position and the target area. Ideally, you'd want atmospheric readings from multiple points along the trajectory path. Morrison stared at the maps, feeling the weight of responsibility growing heavier. What if we can't get perfect atmospheric data? What if conditions aren't ideal? Sarah considered the question carefully. Then the shot becomes more about instinct and experience than mathematical precision. At some point, technical knowledge has to give way to shooter intuition. Intuition? Morrison laughed nervously. I've never relied on intuition for shots like this. Because you've probably never taken shots like this, Sarah observed quietly. The comment hung in the air. Morrison realized she was right. His longest confirmed kill was at 2800 meters, and that had required multiple attempts and ideal conditions. Williams sensed the tension building. Sarah, hypothetically speaking, if you had to make a shot like this, how would you approach it? Sarah paused, considering whether to answer. Hypothetically, I would focus on reading environmental conditions continuously rather than relying on single measurements. Wind patterns, temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes, they all fluctuate constantly. How do you read conditions continuously? Davis asked. Sarah walked to a window facing the compound's direction. Visual indicators, vegetation movement at different distances, dust patterns, heat mirage, bird flight paths. Nature provides constant atmospheric information if you know how to interpret it. Morrison joined her at the window. That sounds more like art than science. At extreme ranges, they become the same thing, Sarah replied. Science gives you the foundation, but intuition tells you how to apply it in real-world conditions. Morrison studied her profile as she gazed out the window. You talk like someone who's done this before. Sarah turned away from the window. I've observed atmospheric conditions extensively. It's part of understanding how weapons perform in various environments. But Morrison was no longer buying her deflections. Martinez, I think there's more to your background than you're telling us. Sarah returned to her workbench, beginning to reassemble the scope she had been examining. My background isn't relevant to your mission success, Sergeant. Maybe it is, Morrison pressed. If you have experience with extreme-range shooting, we need to know about it. Sarah's hands never paused in their work, but her voice carried a note of finality. I'm a weapons maintenance specialist. My job is to ensure your equipment functions properly. Davis looked between them, sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Sarah, Morrison's right. If you have insights that could help with the mission, we need to hear them. Sarah completed her scope assembly before responding. I've given you the technical information you need. Environmental factors, ballistic considerations, equipment capabilities, the rest is up to the shooter's skill. Morrison felt frustration building. Why won't you just tell us about your shooting experience? Is it classified or something? It's personal, Sarah replied simply. Williams, always the peacemaker, tried a different approach. Sarah, we're all on the same team here. If there's anything that could help us succeed tomorrow, we need to know. Sarah set down her tools and faced the three men. What you need to know is that the equipment will function perfectly. The Barrett is zeroed for standard atmospheric conditions. The scope is precisely aligned, and the ammunition is performing within specifications. Beyond that, mission success depends on factors outside my control. Morrison studied her face, looking for some indication of what she was hiding. You keep talking about this stuff like you've tested it personally. I have tested it, Sarah admitted. Every weapon system that leaves this armory is function tested. At 3800 meters? Morrison challenged. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. The base range only extends to 1,000 meters. Then how do you know the equipment performs at extreme ranges? Sarah's composure finally showed a crack. Because I've tested it elsewhere. The admission hung between them. Morrison sensed he was finally getting closer to the truth, but Sarah's expression suggested he was approaching a boundary she wasn't willing to cross. Where? Morrison asked quietly. Sarah turned back to her workbench. That's not important for tomorrow's mission. But Morrison was persistent. Martinez, I think it is important. I think you know more about extreme-range shooting than you're admitting, and given what we're facing tomorrow, I think we need to know exactly what that experience is. Sarah continued working, but her movements had become more deliberate, more controlled. Sergeant Morrison, I've provided you with all the technical information necessary for mission success. Equipment specifications, environmental considerations, ballistic calculations. What you do with that information is your responsibility. Williams looked uncomfortable with the tension in the room. Come on, guys. We're all on the same side here. Morrison ignored Williams, focusing entirely on Sarah. I don't think you understand. Tomorrow's mission isn't just another assignment. Al-Rashid has been responsible for killing dozens of coalition forces. If we miss this opportunity, more people are going to die. Sarah finally looked up from her work, and Morrison saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Pain, perhaps, or regret. I understand the stakes, Sergeant. Then help us, Morrison said quietly. If you have experience that could make the difference between success and failure, we need to know about it. Sarah stood silent for a long moment, as if weighing invisible factors. Finally, she spoke. I grew up on a ranch in Montana. Predator control was part of life. Sometimes that meant long-range shooting. How long-range? Davis asked. Long enough to learn that mathematics and intuition have to work together at extreme distances. Morrison sensed she was still holding back. What's the longest shot you've ever made? Sarah looked at each of them in turn, as if measuring their trustworthiness. 4,200 meters. The number hit them like a physical blow. 4,200 meters was well beyond anything Morrison had ever attempted, beyond anything most military snipers achieved outside of specialized competitions. 4,000 meters, Williams whispered. 4,200, Sarah corrected. Wolf that had been killing our cattle took the shot from our north pasture ridge. Morrison's mind raced. What rifle? Custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum. My father was a precision rifle enthusiast before he became a rancher. Davis stared at her. A 4,200-meter shot on a wolf? Do you have any idea how difficult that is? Sarah's smile was thin. Yes, I do. Morrison felt his understanding of reality shifting. The woman he had dismissed as support staff had just claimed a shooting achievement that exceeded his capabilities by nearly a mile. "How many shots like that have you made?" "Enough to know that equipment preparation is only half the equation," Sarah replied. "The other half is understanding that every shot at extreme range is unique. Conditions change constantly, and you have to adapt in real time." Williams looked stunned. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us this before?" Sarah resumed her work, her tone becoming matter-of-fact again. "Because my job is weapons maintenance, not marksmanship instruction, and because most people find it difficult to believe." Morrison understood now why her technical knowledge was so precise, why she spoke about extreme-range ballistics with such confidence. "If you can make shots like that, why are you working as a weapons specialist?" Sarah's hands paused in their work. "Because some skills are better kept private." The cryptic answer raised more questions than it answered, but Morrison sensed he had pushed as far as Sarah was willing to go. "Would you be willing to provide consultation on tomorrow's mission? Help us read conditions and adjust for environmental factors?" Sarah considered the request. "I can provide technical support from the base, radio communication for atmospheric calculations and equipment troubleshooting." "That's not what I meant," Morrison said. "I meant in the field, on site." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not cleared for field operations." Morrison's frustration returned. "Then what good is your experience?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "My experience tells me that a 3800-meter shot under field conditions is extremely difficult. Success will depend on perfect equipment performance, ideal environmental conditions, and exceptional marksmanship. I can guarantee the first factor. The others are up to you." Davis had been quiet through most of the exchange, but now he spoke up. "Sarah, you've made longer shots than what we're attempting. In your opinion, what's the probability of success for tomorrow's mission?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "With the equipment available, under ideal conditions, with a skilled marksman, perhaps 60%. Morrison felt his confidence drain. 60%? That's all? "At 3,800 meters, 60% is optimistic," Sarah replied. "There are too many variables beyond human control." Williams looked worried. "What if conditions aren't ideal?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "Then the probability drops significantly." Morrison realized he was facing the most challenging mission of his career, with equipment he understood imperfectly and conditions he couldn't control. For the first time, he began to wonder if he was the right person for the job. "Martinez," he said quietly, "if this mission fails, more soldiers are going to die. If there's anything you can do to increase our chances of success, I'm asking you to consider it." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Morrison saw her internal struggle playing out in her expression. Finally, she spoke. "I'll provide whatever technical support is possible from the base. Beyond that, the mission is in your hands." Morrison nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a situation that would test everyone involved beyond their limits. As they prepared to leave the armory, Sarah's voice stopped them. "Sergeant Morrison?" He turned back to face her. "Trust your equipment, trust your training, and when the moment comes, trust your instincts. At that range, instinct is often more valuable than calculation." Morrison nodded, but as they walked back to their quarters, he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words. More importantly, he couldn't stop wondering what she wasn't telling them about her own capabilities. The night passed slowly, as Morrison's team made final preparations for the mission. But none of them could shake the feeling that they were missing something important about Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, something that might make the difference between success and failure in the morning. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute as Morrison's team moved into position. They had hiked for 3 hours through rocky terrain, carrying the Barrett M82A1 and supporting equipment to the designated shooting position. The ridgeline provided excellent concealment and a clear line of sight to the target compound 3,800 meters away. Davis, Morrison's spotter, was already setting up his observation equipment while Williams established communication with base command. Morrison carefully positioned the Barrett on its bipod, adjusting for the downhill angle they had calculated the night before. "Overwatch, this is Hammer Team. In position," Williams reported through his radio headset. Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system from the base operations center. "Hammer Team, this is Overwatch. I show you in position. Current atmospheric conditions. Temperature 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 63%. Barometric pressure 30.15 inches. Wind speed 5 to 7 miles per hour. Variable direction." Morrison looked through the Barrett's scope, adjusting the magnification to maximum. The compound buildings appeared as small structures in the distance, but he could make out details of the courtyard where Al-Rashid was expected to appear. "Overwatch, requesting wind readings at target area," Davis said into his radio. Sarah's response came after a moment. "Unable to provide specific target area wind data. Recommend visual observation of environmental indicators at various distances." Morrison scanned the terrain between his position and the target, looking for the visual cues Sarah had mentioned. Dust patterns, vegetation movement, heat mirage, all the atmospheric indicators that could tell him about wind conditions along the bullet's path. "I see light movement in the trees about halfway to target," Morrison reported. "Looks like crosswind from the east, maybe 8 to 10 miles per hour." Davis confirmed through his spotting scope. "Concur. Wind appears to be consistent across most of the trajectory path." Morrison made adjustments to his scope, compensating for the expected wind drift. At 3,800 meters, every calculation had to be precise. A small error in wind estimation could result in a miss by several feet. "Hammer Team, be advised target vehicle approaching compound," Sarah's voice reported from base. "ETA approximately 15 minutes. Morrison settled into his shooting position, controlling his breathing and heart rate. This was the most important shot of his career, and everything had to be perfect. The weight of the Barrett felt reassuring against his shoulder, and he trusted the weapon's capability even at this extreme range. "Movement in the compound," Davis reported. "Multiple individuals in the courtyard." Morrison adjusted his scope focus, trying to identify Al-Rashid among the figures moving around the buildings. Intelligence photos had shown a tall man with a distinctive beard, but at nearly 4 kilometers distance, individual identification was challenging. "Target vehicle has arrived," Williams announced. 3 individuals exiting the vehicle. Morrison tracked the new arrivals through his scope. One of them matched Al-Rashid's general description, but positive identification at this range was difficult even with maximum magnification. "Overwatch, we need target confirmation," Morrison said into his radio. Sarah's voice responded from base. "Hammer Team, intelligence confirms Al-Rashid is the tall individual in dark clothing, now moving toward the central building." Morrison found the figure Sarah described and centered his crosshairs. The man was walking casually, unaware he was being observed from nearly 4 kilometers away. This was the shot Morrison had trained for his entire career. "Wind has shifted," Davis reported suddenly. "Now coming from the southeast, approximately 12 miles per hour." Morrison cursed under his breath. Wind changes were his worst nightmare at extreme range. He had compensated for easterly wind, but southeastern wind would require different calculations. "Overwatch, requesting updated atmospheric data," Williams said. Sarah's voice came back immediately. "Hammer Team, I show wind shift confirmed. Southeast wind 10 to 14 miles per hour. Recommend adjusting compensation by 2.5 MOA left and 1 MOA down." Morrison made the scope adjustments, but he felt his confidence wavering. Wind conditions at extreme range were notoriously unpredictable, and a 14-mile-per-hour crosswind could push his bullet off target by 15 feet or more. Target is stationary in the courtyard, Davis reported. Clear shot available. Morrison settled into his final shooting position, controlling his breathing and steadying the rifle. Through his scope, Al-Rashid appeared as a small figure against the compound buildings. The crosshairs were centered on his torso, adjusted for wind and distance. Morrison began his trigger squeeze, applying steady pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment. This was the moment everything depended on. Years of training, equipment preparation, and mission planning all focused on a single bullet's trajectory. Suddenly, static burst through their radio communication system. Morrison paused his trigger squeeze, listening to the interference that was drowning out all radio traffic. "Communication is down," Williams announced, working frantically with his radio equipment. "Some kind of electronic interference." Morrison felt his stomach drop. Without communication support from base, he was cut off from real-time atmospheric updates. Wind conditions could change in seconds at this range, and without Sarah's technical support, he would be shooting blind. "I can't clear the interference," Williams reported. "It's coming from somewhere in the valley." Davis scanned the area with his spotting scope. "I see a communication truck near the compound. They might be jamming our signals deliberately." Morrison realized Al-Rashid's security team was more sophisticated than intelligence had indicated. They were actively preventing external communication, which meant they were aware of potential surveillance. "We need to take the shot now," Morrison said, "before they realize we're here." But as he settled back into shooting position, Morrison felt doubt creeping in. Without base support for atmospheric calculations, he was relying entirely on his own observations and estimates. At 3,800 meters, small errors became large misses. Morrison began his trigger squeeze again, but his heart rate was elevated, and his breathing was irregular. The doubt was affecting his shooting fundamentals, and he knew it. Professional snipers couldn't afford uncertainty at critical moments. Through his scope, Al-Rashid began moving toward the central building. The window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Morrison increased pressure on the trigger, but at the last moment, a strong gust of wind hit their position. He felt the rifle move slightly, enough to throw off his sight alignment. He released the trigger pressure, knowing the shot would have been compromised. "Wind just shifted again," Davis confirmed. "Strong gust from the west." Morrison tried to re-establish his sight picture, but Al-Rashid was now partially concealed by the building's shadow. The perfect shot opportunity had passed, and conditions were becoming increasingly unstable. "Communication restored," Williams announced suddenly. "Interference has stopped." Morrison immediately contacted base. "Overwatch, this is Hammer Team. We need immediate atmospheric update. Wind conditions are unstable." Sarah's voice came through clearly. "Hammer Team, I show multiple wind pattern changes. Current readings indicate gusting winds up to 18 miles per hour from variable directions." Morrison felt his confidence plummet. 18-mile-per-hour gusting winds at 3,800 meters made accurate shooting nearly impossible, even for the most skilled marksman. "Overwatch, what's the probability of successful engagement under current conditions?" Morrison asked. Sarah's response was immediate. "Hammer Team, current atmospheric conditions reduce probability of accurate shot to approximately 20%. 20%. Morrison had never attempted a mission-critical shot with such low probability of success. Professional standards dictated minimum 60% probability for authorized engagement. "Target is moving toward extraction point," Davis reported urgently. "We're losing the opportunity." Morrison watched through his scope as Al-Rashid and his associates began walking toward their vehicles. Intelligence had been correct. He was only staying at the location for a short time, and that time was running out. Morrison made the decision to attempt the shot despite unfavorable conditions. This was their only chance to eliminate a high-value target who had been evading capture for months. He settled into shooting position, compensating for the gusting wind as best he could estimate. But as Morrison began his trigger squeeze, his radio crackled with Sarah's voice from base. "Hammer Team, this is Overwatch. I'm detecting equipment malfunction indicators." Morrison paused. "What kind of malfunction?" "Thermal stress readings on your rifle barrel are approaching critical limits. Extended carrying period and environmental exposure may have affected barrel harmonics." Morrison felt panic rising. Barrel harmonics were critical for accuracy at extreme range. If the barrel's thermal expansion had altered its vibration patterns, his shots could miss by unpredictable amounts. "How do we verify barrel condition?" Davis asked. Sarah's response was immediate. "You need to fire a confirmation shot at a known target to verify point of impact." Morrison looked around their position. The only suitable target for confirmation was a large boulder approximately 800 meters away, but firing a confirmation shot would reveal their position and alert al-Rashid's security team. "If we fire a confirmation shot, we lose operational security," Morrison pointed out. "If you don't fire a confirmation shot, the probability of hitting al-Rashid drops to near zero," Sarah responded. Morrison faced an impossible choice. Risk mission exposure to verify equipment or attempt a nearly impossible shot with potentially compromised equipment. As Morrison wrestled with the decision, Williams suddenly pointed toward the compound. "Movement in the courtyard. They're loading into vehicles." Morrison looked through his scope and saw al-Rashid and his associates preparing to leave. The window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and he had to make a decision immediately. Morrison decided to attempt the shot without confirmation. He settled into position, compensating for wind and potential barrel issues as best he could calculate. Through his scope, al-Rashid appeared small and distant, partially obscured by vehicle shadows. Morrison began his trigger squeeze, but at the last moment his radio erupted with Sarah's voice. "Hammer Team, abort shot!" "Abort shot!" Morrison released trigger pressure immediately. "Why abort?" Sarah's voice was urgent. "I'm detecting approaching weather front. Major atmospheric pressure change incoming in 60 seconds. Current calculations will be invalid." Morrison felt desperation growing. Every factor that could complicate an extreme-range shot was working against them. Wind conditions, equipment concerns, atmospheric changes, and time pressure were all converging to make the shot nearly impossible. "Target is in vehicle," Davis reported. "Preparing to leave compound." Morrison realized they had one last chance before al-Rashid disappeared again. But taking the shot under current conditions was more luck than skill. Suddenly, Sarah's voice came through the radio with unexpected urgency. "Hammer Team, this is Overwatch. I'm coming to your position." Morrison blinked. "What? Overwatch? You're not cleared for field operations." "I'm clearing myself," Sarah responded. "Maintain Overwatch on target. I'll be in position in 20 minutes. William stared at his radio in confusion. "Sarah, how are you getting here? We're 4 clicks from base." Sarah's response was cryptic. "Alternative transportation. Maintain target surveillance." Morrison had no idea what Sarah was planning, but al-Rashid's vehicles were still in the compound courtyard. For unknown reasons, they had delayed their departure, giving Morrison's team an unexpected extension to their operational window. 18 minutes later, Morrison heard the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching from the direction of the base. Through his scope, he saw a small utility helicopter landing at a clearing approximately 1 kilometer from their position. "That's unauthorized air support," Williams observed. Morrison watched through his binoculars as a figure jumped from the helicopter and began moving rapidly toward their position. The figure was carrying what appeared to be a rifle case and moving with the efficiency of someone familiar with rough terrain. 12 minutes later, Sarah Martinez appeared at their position, carrying a rifle case and looking completely different from the weapons maintenance specialist Morrison thought he knew. She was wearing field gear and moving with the confidence of someone comfortable in combat environments. "What the hell is going on?" Morrison demanded. Sarah was already opening her rifle case, revealing a custom weapon Morrison had never seen before. The rifle was sleek and modern, with modifications that spoke of serious precision shooting capability. "Change of plans," Sarah said, beginning to set up her rifle with practiced efficiency. "Current atmospheric conditions require adaptive shooting techniques." Morrison stared at the weapon Sarah was assembling. "What is that?" "Custom 338 Lapua Magnum built for extreme range accuracy," Sarah replied, adjusting the rifle's bipod and scope with movements that spoke of extensive familiarity. "Same caliber I used for the 4200-meter shot?" Davis looked confused. "Sarah, you're not authorized for field operations. How did you get command approval?" Sarah finished setting up her rifle and moved into shooting position. "I didn't ask for command approval." Morrison realized Sarah had gone completely outside military protocol. "You could be court-martialed for this." Sarah was already looking through her scope, studying the compound in the distance. "Target is still in the courtyard. Clear shot available." Morrison looked through his own scope and confirmed Al-Rashid was visible near his vehicle. "Sarah, even if you're authorized to be here, this shot is nearly impossible under current conditions." Sarah adjusted her scope settings with precise movements. "Current conditions require reading atmospheric patterns in real time rather than relying on pre-calculated data." Morrison watched in fascination as Sarah made rapid adjustments to her rifle, compensating for factors he couldn't even identify. Her movements were fluid and confident, showing familiarity with extreme range shooting that exceeded his own experience. "Wind is gusting 18 miles per hour from variable directions," Morrison pointed out. "Thermal currents are unstable. Atmospheric pressure is changing." Sarah continued her preparation without pausing. "Wind patterns at the target area are different from wind patterns at this position. Thermal currents create predictable updrafts in the valley. Atmospheric pressure changes are gradual enough to calculate in real time." Morrison realized he was watching someone whose understanding of extreme-range shooting far exceeded his own. "How can you compensate for all those variables?" Sarah settled into final shooting position, her breathing controlled and steady. "By reading the environment continuously instead of trusting static calculations." Through her scope, Sarah could see details of the compound that Morrison had missed. Vegetation movement at different distances, dust patterns indicating wind direction changes, heat mirage revealing thermal currents. All the environmental indicators she had learned to read during years of extreme-range shooting. "Target confirmed," Sarah said quietly. "Al-Rashid is standing beside the central vehicle." Morrison looked through his own scope and saw Al-Rashid clearly visible in the compound courtyard. The distance was 3,800 meters, and atmospheric conditions remained challenging. Sarah began her final breathing pattern, controlling her heart rate and muscular tension. Through her scope, Al-Rashid appeared as a small but distinct figure against the compound buildings. The crosshairs were centered on his torso, adjusted for wind, distance, and all the environmental factors she was reading in real time. Morrison watched in silence as Sarah began her trigger squeeze. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, showing the confidence of someone who had made similar shots successfully before. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only focused concentration on the task at hand. Sarah fired. The Barrett's muzzle blast was deafening in the mountain silence. Morrison immediately looked through his spotting scope toward the compound, trying to observe the bullet's impact. For 18 seconds, the flight time Sarah had calculated, nothing happened. Then Morrison saw Al-Rashid collapse in the compound courtyard. "Target down," Davis confirmed through his spotting scope. "Clean hit, center mass." Morrison stared at the compound in amazement. Sarah had just made a shot he wasn't confident he could have made under ideal conditions, and she had done it under some of the most challenging atmospheric conditions possible. "Confirmed kill," Williams announced. "Target neutralized." Sarah was already disassembling her rifle, preparing for rapid extraction. We need to leave immediately. That shot will bring response teams. Morrison was still processing what he had witnessed. Sarah, that was an extraordinary shot. Sarah continued packing her equipment with efficient movements. It was a necessary shot. As they prepared to leave their position, Morrison realized his understanding of Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez had been completely wrong. She wasn't just a weapons maintenance specialist who happened to know technical details. She was a precision marksman whose capabilities exceeded those of most trained snipers. "Sarah," Morrison said as they began moving toward the extraction point, "who are you really?" Sarah shouldered her rifle case and looked at him directly. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Sergeant Morrison, someone who understands weapon systems and knows how to use them when necessary." But Morrison knew there was more to the story. People didn't develop shooting skills like Sarah's through casual hunting experience. Her knowledge, equipment, and capabilities spoke of extensive training and practice at levels that exceeded normal military instruction. As they reached the extraction helicopter, Morrison made a mental note to investigate Sarah's background more thoroughly. But for now, the mission was complete, and al-Rashid would never threaten coalition forces again. During the flight back to base, Morrison found himself looking at Sarah with completely different eyes. The quiet weapons specialist who cleaned rifles and answered technical questions had just demonstrated marksmanship abilities that exceeded his own considerable skills. Sarah seemed to sense his scrutiny. "Something wrong, Sergeant?" Morrison shook his head. "Just trying to understand how someone with your abilities ended up in weapons maintenance." Sarah's smile was enigmatic. "Maybe weapons maintenance was exactly where I wanted to be." Morrison realized he would probably never get the complete truth about Sarah's background. But he no longer had any doubts about her capabilities or her value to their unit. When they returned to base, word of the successful mission spread quickly. Al-Rashid's elimination was a significant victory, and Morrison's team was commended for their achievement. But Morrison made sure everyone knew who had actually made the shot that counted. From that day forward, Sarah Martinez was no longer seen as just the woman who cleaned rifles. She was the sniper who had made an impossible shot when it mattered most. And while she continued her work in the armory, everyone on base understood they were dealing with someone whose skills ran much deeper than anyone had imagined. Morrison never did learn the complete truth about Sarah's background, but he no longer needed to. He had seen her capabilities demonstrated under the most challenging conditions possible, and that was enough. The mission had changed everything Morrison thought he knew about precision shooting, and everything his team thought they knew about Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez.